All right, so this is my random brain project. The first one that I did was the medulla, and the medulla is the base of the brainstem and is a slight swelling that occurs at that region. Its primary functions are to control heartbeat, breathing, and blood pressure, so basically any involuntary actions of the human body. Interestingly, because we do not need a conscious mind to regulate these involuntary functions, thanks to the medulla and the brainstem, one can remain in a coma, undergoing brain damage, and still technically be alive. And I chose an automatic pencil sharpener to represent the medulla because when sticking a pencil into the sharpener, it automatically sharpens it without me having to consciously turn the pencil around and around and around again. Also, the sharpener provides my pencil with like the most essential part for me to keep using it, which is like sharp tip, which is also kind of what the medulla does by controlling your heartbeat and stuff. The second one is the pons. And the pons lay in the brainstem right above the medulla. They kind of are like a highway that connects the brainstem with the brain. And pons help coordinate movements such as moving a foot, eye movement, hand movement, etc. And also they help with sleep regulation. So I chose my AirPods to represent the pons because the AirPods deliver music to my ears, which can help me coordinate my dance moves. Like for example, if I'm listening to like a nice vibey song like "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" by Marvin Gaye, then I'm probably gonna be swaying side to side. But then on the other hand, if I'm listening to a song like "Immortal" by J. Cole, then I'd be bobbing my head up and down and just trying to understand what he's trying to say. The next one I did was the reticular formation. So the reticular formation lies inside the brainstem, just between our ears, and it's basically a neuron network that travels from the spinal cord to the thalamus, which I'll talk about later. And its primary function is to filter incoming stimuli and separating the irrelevant background or unnecessary stimuli, and then relating that information to other regions of the brain. In essence, it basically helps regulate the arousal and alertness of individuals. So I picked a water filter we recently installed as a representation of the reticular formation because, like the reticular formation, it filters out unnecessary things. Also, well, according to my mother, this healthier water is supposed to keep me more alert because it doesn't have harmful nutrients. So the next one is the cerebellum. The cerebellum extends from the rear of the brainstem and in rudimentary terms is sort of shaped like a baseball. It is more commonly known as the little brain. The cerebellum enables nonverbal learning / memory and helps us judge time, regulate our emotions, and differentiate the discrepancies between sounds and textures. Additionally, it works with the pons to coordinate voluntary movements. A direct injury to the cerebellum would result in difficulty running and walking. Essentially, you'd have very awkward and exaggerated movements. So, continuing my pond metaphor music, I chose the app Spotify on my phone because the Spotify app and my AirPods both work together to provide me with music, which then helped me with my coordinate my dance moves. The next one I picked was the next one I did was the thalamus, and the thalamus sits atop the brainstem and can be best visually described as a pair of egg-like structures. In a broad sense, the thalamus is the brain sensory control center. So basically, it receives information from all the senses except smell, and it delivers that information to regions of the brain that pertain to seeing, hearing, touching, etc. It also receives information from other high-level brain regions and sends that information to the medulla and the cerebellum. So I chose a thermostat to represent the thalamus because when you input a change in the temperature, it sends that information to the vents. And additionally, we can set the temperature for each floor to be different. So it's like the thermostat controls everything and directs the correct temperature information to the right floor of the house and the correct vent. The next one is the amygdala. So the amygdala is located in the medial temporal lobe, just in front of the hippocampus. It consists of two lima bean-sized neural clusters and is associated with emotional processors. It basically plays a fundamental role in perception and processing of fear and aggression. I chose my Google Home as a representation for the amygdala because whenever I tell it to turn off the music, it actually keeps on turning it louder and louder and louder, which then makes me quite frustrated and even really angry. And sometimes I get so frustrated that I start yelling at the Google Home, and when it says sorry, I kind of feel bad and I apologize to it. The next one is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is embedded deep in the temporal lobe of the brain. It is a complex curved structure which is commonly known for its seahorse shaped like closeness. And the hippocampus is responsible for the processing of conscious memory learning and memories. So interestingly, individuals who injure their hippocampus severely have difficulty in forming new memories of facts and events. I choose my AP economic textbooks as a representation for the hippocampus because is where I go to learn such memorize important economic concepts, and also because I'm actually reading and putting in a conscious effort. This correlates with the function of the hippocampus. The next one is the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is a complex neural structure that lies below the thalamus. It is the most important link for maintaining one's bodily functions, which are eating, drinking, body temperature, sexual behavior, etc. Additionally, It helps control the endocrine system to the pituitary gland and is linked to emotions and the dopamine reward related system. So I chose the mint chocolate Oreos that I love to eat as a representation for the hypothalamus because it correlates with the eating bodily function. And also whenever I feel sad or really happy, I eat these Oreos to kind of replace that feeling of euphoria. And that kind of connects with the dopamine related reward system. That's the function of the hypothalamus. So the next one is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain and is slightly bigger than the P. It is more commonly known as the master gland because it controls the function of most of the glands in the endocrine system. And the pituitary gland essentially produces hormones that affect specific part of the body. It controls metabolism, growth, sexual maturation, and other physical, mental, such processes. For my representative item for the pituitary gland, I chose an item called the Bonvita, and it is sort of like the Indian version of Hershey's chocolate syrup, except that it's actually supposed to be considered healthy, but I mean, that's up to debate. So in India, the saying goes that if you drink 2 cups of Bonvita, no more, no less, then one is able to grow in both height and in strength, which is similar to the function of the pituitary gland. Right hemisphere. So there are 2 halves of the brain, the left and the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is responsible for cognitive functions such as attention, processing of visual patterns such as shapes and emotions, and it is known as a region of the brain that controls creativity, artistic and musical skills, and spatial ability. So last year for my birthday, my friend gifted me this painting, and it is a play on one of my favorite artists' album cover. His name is Lil Uzi, and instead of Lil Uzi's face, it's mine. So this painting serves as a representation of the right hemisphere because in order to produce this artistic masterpiece, he had to utilize his creativity. Therefore, he had to use his right hemisphere. So the next one is the left hemisphere. So this is the part of the brain which I personally think that has a bigger effect on my interests and my skills because I really like mathematics. I really like maths and physics, etc. So the left hemisphere controls language and speech, comprehension, mathematics skills, and writing. It essentially controls the more logical functions. So I chose a calculator to represent the left hemisphere because when I'm doing my calculus and physics homework, I use the calculator to solve complex problems. And since doing maths is a function of the left hemisphere, as I said, the calculator is a perfect representation for it. The next one is the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is located in the white matter of the cerebrum and are axon fibers that connect the 2 central hemispheres, which I said were the left and the right hemispheres. So the corpus callosum integrates and transfers information from both hemispheres to process sensory, motor, and other cognitive skills. So I chose a glue stick as a representation of the corpus callosum because it attaches 2 different materials to each other just as the corpus callosum is connected to cerebral hemispheres. So the next one is the cerebral cortex. So when you think of the brain, you imagine the squishy pink glob, and essentially that is the cerebral cortex. Basically, it is the outer surface of the brain consisting of a thin layer of interconnected neural cells. It is the body's ultimate control and information processing center. So the main function of the cerebral cortex are higher level processing associated with consciousness, thinking, emotions, reasoning, language, and memory. So the cerebral cortex is like the bark of the tree because while it forms the surface of the tree, it actually provides it with much more complex functions of survival, such as preventing the tree from losing moisture and insulating it. The next one is the gyri. So the gyri are ridges that bump on the surface of the brain, and its main function is to increase the surface area of the left and the right hemispheres, which then provides us with a better cognition without having to increase the size of the brain. I chose a stapler as a representation of it because when you staple one paper together, when you staple a bunch of pieces of paper together, you increase the surface area of just that one singular paper. And then if you fold it into a really tight square, sort of like, then you can sort of fold it into a tiny tight square, which is kind of like what the brain is. The next one is a sulci, and the sulci surround each gyri and are considered to be the indentations or grooves of the brain. So the sulci and gyri both work together to separate brain regions and increase the surface area of the brain for better cognitive abilities. So continue my staple metaphor that I talked about before, I chose staples as a representation for the sulci because they actually help attach the paper together to increase the surface area of the one paper. And without the stapler, the gyri would be kind of useless. So the next one is the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is located in the cerebral cortex and lies behind the forehead. Its main functions are involved in speaking and muscle movements and also help in making plans and judgments. I chose my planner to represent the frontal lobe because in the planner, I write down things I need to accomplish in my day. The things written down include homework, college essays, chores, etc. So depending on if I finish all my tasks, then I decide to do things I actually enjoy, such as listening to music or watching a movie. Essentially, just as the frontal lobe helps in making plans and judgments, my planner helps me do the same exact thing. The next one is the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe lies in the cerebral cortex and lies above the ears. It receives information from the opposite ears, thus it encompasses the auditory areas. So the temporal lobe processes auditory information and assists with the encoding of memory. So the item I chose to represent the temporal lobe is my speakers, which are connected to my desktop. So when I'm listening to a video and explaining some physics or psychology concept, I turn on the speaker and I'm able to hear the sound. So just like the frontal lobe processes auditory information, my speaker takes in the message from the video and then relays it out loud to me, thus helping me understand the content better. So the next one is the parietal lobe, and the parietal lobe is in the cerebral cortex and lies towards the top of the head, towards kind of the rear end. It receives sensory information such input for touch and body movements. Additionally, it assists in the management of taste, hearing, sight, and touch and smell. So I pick my shower as a representation for the parietal lobe because when it's early in the morning and I step in the shower and the cold water hits my face, I instantly wake up and feel refreshed. So just as the parietal lobe receives sensory information for touch, the cold water from the shower gives me a much needed shock. The next one is the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe lies in the cerebral cortex as well, and it's in the back of the head. So it includes areas that receive information from the visual fields. And it is associated with visual spatial processing, distance, depth perception, color determination, etc. Anything that's basically having to do with visual stuff is what it pertains to. So I chose my glasses to represent the occipital lobe because without them, I would not be able to see anything that is far away. And essentially, just as the occipital lobe helps with perception, my glasses help me visually see things more clearly. And the next one is the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is located at the front of the frontal lobe and is responsible for the higher brain functions. So these functions include expression of emotions and social behaviors, problem solving, attention spanning, planning, etc. So it also helps with personality development. I chose my phone as a representation of the prefrontal cortex because more often than not, my phone controls my attention span. And when I'm studying, I sometimes get distracted by my phone and due to social media apps, text conversations with my friends. The next one is the motor strips at cortex. So the motor cortex is an area at the rear of the frontal lobe that controls voluntary movements. So I chose my Xbox remote controller as a representation of the motor cortex because using the controller, I can actually control the movements and actions of the virtual characters on the screen. The next one is the Broca's area, and the Broca's area is located in the frontal cortex and plans the process of speech by communicating with the temporal lobes. Damage to the Broca area leads to disruption in speaking. So I chose my headset slash microphone as a representation for Broca's area because it helped me communicate with my friends via speech when we're playing Xbox together. The next one is the auditory cortex. So the auditory cortex is located in the temporal lobe and plays a fundamental role in perceiving sound. It is also associated with recognizing sounds specific to speech. Basically, it discerns the different sounds that allow us to tell apart individual voices. I chose the app Shazam on my phone as a representation of the auditory cortex because when I don't know the name of a song playing, the app just listens to it for 5 seconds and immediately tells me the name of it. Essentially, just as the auditory cortex helps differentiate individual voices, the Shazam app helps differentiate different songs. And then the next one is the Wernicke's area. The Wernicke's area located in the temporal lobe connects to Broca's area via neural network and its primary function is around language processing and comprehension. And damage to the Broca's area leads to disruption in understanding. I chose the Google Translate as a metaphor for Wernicke's area because it helps me translate my French homework to English such that I can actually understand what it's really saying. Additionally, because some words do not directly translate to English properly, for example, awesome in English does not have an exact translation in Hindi, Google Translate can accidentally use the wrong word and thus creating a disruption in understanding such translation. So the last one is the sensory strip in the sensory cortex. So the somosensory cortex is an area in the front of the parietal lobe that registers and processes body touch and movement sensations. It processes information such as touch, temperature, pain, pressure, etc. The object I chose to represent the sensory cortex is this automatic massager to my father bod. Basically, you plug it in and then place it on the area of your body you want to massage, and it slowly starts to add pressure, adding more and more pressure until it finds the perfect amount that releases the tension in the area. And just as the sensory cortex processes pressure, the massager does the same thing. And yeah, that's it.